Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Eliot.
Before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And if you would like to help us out with supporting the show, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia. So if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help you would be able to give us would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are going to be talking about different ways of making characters. In particular, we're going to be talking about just the class-based system of character creation in RPGs, most notably done by Dungeons & Dragons, but there's plenty of other games that do it as well. And we're also going to be talking about other ways of creating characters and maybe even get a little bit into advancement. So just to start off, what do you guys prefer whenever you're making a character? Do you prefer to have like where a class-based system is you just basically have a package of abilities that you choose from at the beginning of the game, and that package is going to determine from the beginning of the game to the end of the game basically the path of advancement for your character? Or do you prefer something that lets you pick and choose what exactly you want, and as you gain more and more either experience or whatever method of advancement the system uses, you're able to choose more abilities or increase your stats in some way? Which of those do you guys prefer for your system of making characters?
Go ahead, Jordan.
I always prefer as many options as I can possibly have. Full stop. Any time that I find myself in a game that is shoehorning my idea into some like fixed archetype, I feel the chafe pretty hard. I have a lot to say about this, but that's my first pass at it. Eliot, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, though the majority of the games I find myself writing for and running and even kind of playing in is that the leveling system, be it D&D, the best example. I personally prefer, I've never really thought about it, so let me articulate it kind of how I've always kind of thumbnailed games in two ways. You got the leveling system, which is, you get these throttle levels up. You start off pretty puny, and then you just throttle your way every time you level. But me personally, I prefer to be as much of a whole character as I can be off the bat. I guess I'm like you in that way, Jordan. I personally would prefer, I've had the most fun playing games where your character is mainly formed upon creation, and you have these, then the experience just kind of gives you these small incremental improvements in certain areas. And so maybe by the end of a long game, you're still a lot stronger than before, but it seems like in the leveling system, you just start off so puny, and if a game runs for a short time, you just stay very puny. Whereas, in sort of more of a, like a World of Darkness or a Chaosium kind of system, your character is pretty well, established. Your character's pretty much who your character's going to be for the majority of the game right off the bat. That's how I prefer it. Does that make sense, Clayton?
Yeah, it makes sense. Jordan, I'm going to basically echo everything that you said, and for this question, it sounds like just based on this one question, we might not have much discussion on this topic, but I really want to kind of get into some of the nitty gritty, especially some of the points you brought up, Eliot, because that's where I'm going to start arguing. The idea that a character is more fully formed in a Pointbuy system versus a class system, I'm going to disagree on. And I would also disagree that most of the World of Darkness systems are not, in fact, Pointbuy. They are a hidden class-based system.
Well, that's definitely true in the old school, I guess even new school vampire, right? I mean, if you're a vampire, you basically have your class in whichever clan you're a part of, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
There's a distinction that I want to make right now before we get too far into this, and that distinction is these two separate dimensions of a character. The type of progression being the initial point buy and then adding more points as you gain experience, or a level based system where you've got a prescribed track that you're on. That's one set of things about a character that are actually independent of the question of whether or not you have a specific characteristic that is a class, a class, an archetype, a clan, a tribe, a profession, whatever, and how much you have to stay in the lane of what kind of character you've made there. Like you could have a point buy system that still has classes. You could have a level based system that does not have classes, or very, very broad classes, like D20 Modern tried to have super broad classes that were just loosely based around each of the 6 attributes. And what you did with that is kind of up to you. But, I just want to point that out, that those are two separate things to be considered, right?
Yeah, and before we go too far into the weeds of this distinction and like talking about the nitty-gritties of it, I kind of want to talk about why doing a class-based system might be a better option than doing a point-buy system for creating your character in a particular system. I would say that the main pros, I really didn't come up with very many pros, but that might be my bias because I'm not particularly a fan of class-based systems. But I would say that the biggest pro for it is if you, like Jordan, you said, talking about the archetypes, you are playing an archetype of the system. The system is going to convey through the classes, through these archetypes, what the game is designed to be. You pick a class in D&D and you know right off the bat what D&D is. You look at all of the stats that are associated with the class and you say, okay, this is a game that simulates tactical combat to varying degrees based on edition, but this is basically a tactical combat game, and social interaction is just kind of an afterthought. The rules for that are just kind of an afterthought and are there, but you can play them, but that's not what the system is built for. In most of the point buy systems, you still get that of learning what the focus of the system is, but whenever you're presented with usually an overwhelming choice on the far end of the spectrum with games like GURPS and Hero, you are presented with, oh my God, there is so much in this system. I can do anything. I'm going to get analysis paralysis because I can't figure out what I want to do with my character. The biggest, I would say that the biggest pro for class-based systems is new players can look at it and they can see an archetype that they want to play. And if you are not at all familiar with what the system can do, the classes tell you exactly what the system can do and what you are expected to do in the system.
Mm-hmm.
You guys I appreciate your technical brains and your, maybe that's a difference in the way that we think. I always enjoy how you guys can get very specific into the weeds of things I would never think of. But what comes to my mind, whenever one thing that I like about a system that isn't necessarily class-based, I feel like they tend to be just more novel and creative in their character creation. And I kind of enjoy the novelty of playing a new system and having a completely different way of looking at building a character. And I say that just with the system in mind. I'm sure there's a million out there, but the one that I've always had more of a delight to actually like make the character and play a couple sessions, but I found it's not super conducive to a long game, is like the old Deadlands system. When you intentionally try to break out of the the level kind of idea, the I want to say the D&D kind of classic idea is, I think that those games, I enjoy a creative way for character creation. So I remember the old system used a deck of regular playing cards, if I remember correctly. And even though there was some variability in your starting points or your starting, abilities and attributes in that way, I felt like you could create anything. A system where you just kind of are given a clean slate and a set of choices. I completely agree. I've definitely been that player with paralysis, with just feeling like you have to have mastery of the entire book to really build your character. I guess that's an advantage that class-based games get, is they're a little more beginner friendly, or just maybe even lazy people friendly. If you want to build a character and you just say, I'm going to play a fighter, that really narrows down the book itself to, 10-15% of its content. So you just go and you can it gives you a track, you follow the track, and it's just very point and click. And that's definitely one advantage to that system. But like Jordan said, it's also very constraining, right?
I think Deadlands is a pretty interesting kind of middle ground type of system, because you are free to put your points wherever you want when you're making your character, and there's the random element of the deck and all that, but there's still like clear character archetypes that exist. There's the huckster, the shaman, the mad scientist, the gunslinger. Like, there's roles to fall into there. And while you could technically multi-class into a few of those different things, multi-class in air quotes here, you'd have to spread yourself pretty thin. And I like that when game systems represent kind of an elite path that you could take at the expense of a large expenditure of your character creation resources, your character points or whatever. Like, you've invested into doing that stuff. Traveler does kind of a similar thing, like to stay on a class, again, air quotes, track in Traveler, that's like challenging depending on what it is. Every, phase of your life, you've got to roll and, overcome something, or else you're going to end up spinning off into, God knows where your destiny is going to go. But like, you've only got so many rounds of that before you start getting into advanced age, and like, it's its own set of concerns there as well. But it's technically possible you could like start Traveler as the equivalent of, I don't know what, Clayton, like a 6th level fighter or whatever kind of thing, if you just like kept taking the same career path and succeeding. But I like when there's things to invest in that can be exclusive. I don't like when there's guardrails that are like prescribed things, and that's the only way that you can build, a fighter or whatever it is that you're trying to put together.
Class like leveling games, though, I will say another thing to its credit too is I think they do lend themselves to long running games, because and you guys can give me some insights on how other games do this, but in my experience, games that avoid the leveling system, you very much marginally improve. And I think in Deadlands is the example I'll give, that like you get so many points or experience or what have you at the end of a session based off your DM's preference, and then you make these slight incremental improvements in maybe single stats or here or there. Whereas in a leveling system, you get this huge dopamine hit, and like you really, like when you hit that next level, it feels really good, and it makes you really excited to come to the table the next time, because you're not going to get a ton of stuff, and but like there's something about hitting that next level, getting that next level of spells, or unlocking that next great feat or whatever it may be, that I think it just feels really good. That games that have a more subtle experience progression, they kind of sacrifice a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot to be said about, like you said, the dopamine hit that comes from getting a new or a new level, and you get a whole new or a whole additional suite of abilities, whether it be a whole new level of spells that you can do stuff with, or a brand new ability that you suddenly unlock. But that's partially why I don't like class-based systems that are based on levels, is that I'm going to be locked in to those abilities. Jordan brought this point up earlier. You're limited on what you're going to be able to gain. Like in D&D, if you can only get sneak attack or backstab, depending on the edition, you can only get that as a rogue. You have to take levels in rogue or thief in order to gain those abilities. And it doesn't matter how good of a fighter you are, how sneaky and conniving your character is in roleplay, how much of a just an absolute bastard they are. They can never get those rogue abilities. And that's why I love Pointbuy systems and the systems that allow you to spend individual points as you improve your character. You spend to buy each particular ability that you want, so that you can customize it along the way, so that you're not just this character that is as close to what you want whenever you create the character, but as you are developing, you choose exactly which areas you develop in, rather than you're just dumped a whole bunch of stuff on you.
No, I completely agree. I think that's why I've always preferred them. My very first game was in the Chaosium system, and we didn't play it long, but I just really enjoyed, that anything could get better. What you use gets better. And then I like games that give me experience points, and we were talking about Deadlands as the example, and I'm sure very few people have played that old school version, but in it, and this is true for most games that are not strictly a level kind of system, they'll give you archetypes, right? They'll give you examples and say, oh, you want to be a gunslinger because that suits the setting. Well, here's a great example of one, and you can kind of use it as a template. But the ability, say if I wanted some healing magic, or I think maybe even in terms of like flaws in, what's the word I'm looking for here? Flaws in
merits.
Yeah, I mean a lot of games have that kind of concept that you can earn your own set of specialties just by your preference that you maybe chose at character creation, but there's no stopping you from learning something completely different. And leveling systems definitely railroad you into a particular vein that it's very constraining at times.
You end up with a really uneven progression if you try to do anything interesting in like 5th edition. Like Clayton, you were talking about having to dip into rogue to get a sneak attack, but there's like certain classes and archetypes within those classes where your big thing that you get for leveling up, like your class ability or whatever, very well might be completely useless and in fact redundant. So like, for example, if I would create a first level fighter and then play that for a little while and eventually decide I want to start leveling as a cleric and I want to go into like a war priest, a war domain. Well, one of the war domain like level abilities is you get heavy armor proficiency, and that's what you get for that level. Well, I'm a fucking fighter. I already have heavy armor proficiency. Well, sorry, dead level. Suck it. Like, there's no swapping out for something else. There's no list of options, anything like that. You're just boned because the fucking designers didn't think that anyone would want to play a fighter cleric multi-class and so actively penalize them, because it is a penalty when you've got a progression in place and that gets undermined by the system itself. Like, you're effectively a level behind everyone else who presumably got useful things for that level for their characters, right? So I don't know, it disincentivizes creative character assembly, I think.
Not to mention when this was definitely true in 3rd edition. I want to say it was the Bard. The Bard was shit. And so, like, when you make a level system, you force people down these tracks. Like, if you're a game designer, you can't make it perfectly equal. You're going to find that whole sections of the book are just trash, and it sucks. And then, not to mention, there's nothing worse than, like, showing up to a game, having talked to your DM or whatever, what have you, and making a really good character, and then someone else shows up who just kind of threw something together. They make the same damn class. Well, you have in those types of games, you have to worry about, like, well, who's going to be the rogue, or who's going to be the this or that, and you end up in all these unintended consequences of maybe a very unbalanced party. Or you might end up getting pushed into or out of characters you like to play just because of the politics of the social part of the game, and I've had it happen in those other systems where there's definitely, like, skill overlap and area overlap, but it's never the problem that it can be in leveling kind of games.
The guys at Wizards botched the Ranger 5th edition class so badly that they released an official revised Ranger class to try to patch their bullshit.
Exactly.
Yeah, but if you look at like point-buy systems for making characters, if you don't know what you're doing, you can make every part of your character completely ineffectual. And that's one of the strengths of the class-based system is ostensibly you're going to have a certain degree of viability if you choose the class and you stick to it and you don't try to if you just stick to the class and you don't try to do anything that breaks like multi-classing or stuff like that kind of brings these things that give you dead levels and stuff. But if you're doing a point-buy system, if you spend your points wrong, you're going to have a character who can't do anything.
Man, I think rewarding players for having knowledge of the system of the game that they're playing is a feature, not a bug.
Well, yeah, and like another counterpoint to that is that, I mean, it's gotten better over the years, but probably just that's because of the quality of the players that I play with and game masters I ran for. I personally, whenever I have, say, a D&D game, we'll say, I almost always choose, well, it's not anymore. I will always use the point-buy method. But, there's nothing worse than the performance anxiety of, like, well, here you go. Here's your chance, fighter. We're in a combat. Go tank. And then, you end up taking and if your character, say you're just rolling randomly, you have bad stats, and you just make a subpar, I mean, even if the numbers force you to make a subpar version of a class or whatever, you just get kind of pigeonholed into a role. And, I don't know, I kind of lost where this was going, but there are just so many disadvantages of that rigid, system that, I don't know, man, I don't like it.
As somebody who is trained, probably now I'm in the hundreds for measuring the number of people that I've played with over the years. And having trained a large portion of those in what exactly a role-playing game is and how exactly you play the game, the ability to just sit down and play a game without literally every single player having to learn the rules of the game in order to play it is a very strong benefit for class-based systems, especially, like, I keep going back to the new players, but it's not just new players, it's also players who are more casual with their familiarity with the hobby, who aren't like us and willing to sit down and read a 300-page tome of game rules in order to become proficient in a system.
Oh, I'm that person. Oh, I'm 100% that person. But so from that perspective, one thing that I enjoy about the non-class necessarily systems is that I feel like whenever I'm given just kind of this blank slate, and then I'm thinking more like, what kind of a character do I want to be? And so, I feel like when you strip away the classes or whatever, it almost becomes more, to me at least, I actually care about my stats a lot less. Because I think more in terms of like, what kind of a person is this person I'm trying to conjure up, and how am I going to present it? And I can be whatever I say my character's going to be. I mean, I've played plenty of characters who just had shitty characters. I'm not very good at min-maxing. I try to be, but I'm almost always one of the worst characters, because I don't put as much effort into learning every system I play. But it seems like in those systems where it's kind of that blank slate, kind of idea, I just worry about it less. I don't try to fit a mold. I just try to get an idea, make the character, and if the character's, I mean, frankly, and there's a lot of wiggle room in statistics anyway. So even if you max out a character's statistical ability to do something, if you're not quite, the best at something, more than likely, if you put your best stats in a certain area and you choose some complementary, abilities that the game gives you, your character's gonna be good at whatever they do. And so you can, if you want to be a gunslinger and pretend like you're the fastest gun in the West, but the guy next to you is actually faster on paper, I don't care. I'm still going to play that character with that same attitude. And I just feel like in a class-based system, if I'm a ranger, I have to play Aragorn. If I'm a a fighter, I've got to play Gimli or Sternbright. Was it Brightblade from Dragonlance? If I'm going to be a paladin, I feel like a lot of the characters kind of set for me, which I think that D&D's done a good job in 5th edition trying to give you avenues even within your own class to kind of prevent that. I like that they did that, but still, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Clayton, sir.
I was just going to go back, Eliot, you said about using them, like being in the mold. That's my biggest issue with the class-based system is I usually come up with a concept that is irrespective of the class. And if I come up with a concept and it doesn't 100% mesh with one of the options that are existent for for a particular class, I'm always going to have to make compromises. And in a point buy system or other types of systems, I feel like as long as you've got enough points, you can make pretty much anything that you want, that the rules are going to be able to accommodate. Like in D&D, if I want, at one point I wanted to convert a character that I had made in 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons into a 5th edition character because I really liked the character. We are now, 7 going on 8 years into Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, and I still cannot make a 1-for-1 recreation of a couple of characters that I've really wanted to play from 4th edition and also from 3rd edition. That they don't exist in the current edition, and I would have to make compromises if I wanted to make that exact same character concept again.
Can I pose a question?
No. Jordan, you're up. I'm kidding. Eliot, go ahead.
We've kind of, as usual, we're lavishing all of our attention on D&D while we shit on it. Can we talk about a few systems that really do it well, do the point buy? I feel like a lot of people out there are more than likely going to be pretty familiar with D&D, but what are some systems that really do a point buy or an alternative to a level system do it really well? I mean, I would throw out there Deadlands, the original version. I haven't played the newer editions that are probably now still, what are they, 15, 20 years old, the new edition, quote unquote. World of Darkness, is that maybe a first launching point?
I would say, World of Darkness was my first introduction to a not class-based system, but I would say that the furthest on the spectrum games that are point buy would be GURPS and Hero. In both of those game systems, you are given one pool of points at the start of character creation, and everything else comes out of that one pool of points. Most other systems, whenever you're talking about point buy, they have different areas that have its own selection of points that you can choose from and can spend in order to make your character. But in GURPS and Hero, you have one giant pool, and it is beautiful, but fucking intimidating whenever you're brand new to the system and looking over the book and see, oh wow, I can literally make anything. Oh my god, it's going to take me so much studying to be able to make the character that I want to play.
Man, I remember Cyberpunk 2020, the old school game. That was a bear to make a character because there were so many options and so many things you had to keep in your head.
The Call of Cthulhu and Stormbringer and what is it? The basic role playing system, that whole Chaosium system, Rune Quest, all of that is I would consider a point buy primarily. There are like professions and backgrounds or whatever, and things like that you can use to kind of define your character, but those are a pretty strong example, I think, of a point-based classless system. Very well done.
Man, it seemed my heart's in Chaosium, man. I haven't played it that much, but it's where I started, and I just absolutely love that percentage-based system. Yeah, I've not seen that in any other system. Does any other system do that? That just seems so commonsensical. It's like you can't level a skill you didn't use. And when you use a skill, you just check it off. And that's something whenever you want to spend your experience, those are your choices, the things you used. That's just, how is that not just obvious?
And the level up mechanic is brilliant, that you have to roll under and succeed. You use it once, so you get your check mark. But when you go to level up the skill, you have to roll over it. And that means that as you get better, it gets directly harder to get better still. And so you wind up like mastering somewhere in like the 90% range. And from there, getting any better is like very, very difficult. It's possible, but it's very difficult, and that's fucking genius.
And it encourages, that kind of a system encourages you to go outside of your comfort zone. And I've never seen a game that like allows your character to grow in a direction you didn't intend. I mean, because of that system, your character concept may not jive with the story that the DM puts in front of you. And so next thing you know, you're finding yourself leveling a lot in a skill you maybe hadn't necessarily intended on using, but it just suited each moment. And next thing you know, your character starts to grow very organically. And, I love it.
Let me tell you, you learn to swim in that game.
Any other big games? What about that Savage World system? Is that a leveling system? I've never played it.
It is a point buy at character creation, and then it is a slightly modified, almost leveling system. You have different areas where you can spend points at character creation on your main attributes, your skills, and you may have access to things called edges, which are basically like feats in D&D. And then whenever you advance, you have the option of either taking another edge or increasing one of your attributes or skills, and that's it. You have to wait till you get to your next advance, and then you get to decide, okay, am I going to buy another edge? Am I going to spend my points increasing my skills or other attributes? So it's not exactly the point buy system that we've been describing. Most of the point buy systems for character advancement that I've seen involve accumulating what are usually experience points, but they may go by another name. And then you have to spend those points once you gain them on abilities that have different values. And you have to save up your points to get to what you need in order to buy a new ability or or a stat increase. Savage Worlds is a little bit of a hybrid between the two of them.
Savage Worlds is in a class of games that I don't know how I would describe them, but because they have such a relatively small range of skill progression, as far as just number of points between nothing and your topped out skill, they offload a lot of the progression into that edges, feats, whatever you want to call it, merits kind of mechanic that is it's not going to be higher numbers most of the time, but it's going to be new mechanical things that your character can do, and that has some interesting effects in Savage Worlds. I wonder what you'd think about this, Clayton. From playing Savage Worlds several times and like reading over the books and stuff, and trying to do a couple different things with it, I think that Savage Worlds, at least the fantasy version, has basically like a shadow class system to it. It's not explicit, but just from the way that they've architected some of the edges and stuff, that and how those powers that you get from that weigh against other options, it seems like there are preferential character builds that are just implicit in the game mechanics that would sort of like funnel people towards essentially classes.
I 100% agree. And also where Savage Worlds, compared to a lot of other game systems, the character, the power creep of your character as you between character creation and basically what is considered legendary characters, it's a relatively shallow increase, but compared to most other games, you start off a lot more powerful. Like you're able to do a lot of this, like in Savage Worlds, a newly created party of characters are going to be more likely to take down a dragon than most player characters in most other systems at character creation. So the Savage Worlds tends, and because it has the shallower power increase, you're not able to take on more than one particular archetype if you're going for an archetype, and the edges really lean hard on having multiple prerequisites for those edges that mimic a class, so that you're probably not ever going to qualify for more than maybe one or two.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of chafes me. A lot of games do that, though. Like when you go to buy your edges or your hindrances or your merits and your flaws or whatever, they have these barriers to entry where you must have this kind of stat to do that. You must have this or that. How do you guys feel about that as a mechanic in general? I mean, knee jerk, I not really haven't thought about it that much, but were I to make a game from scratch, I probably wouldn't do that because, I mean, how do you guys feel? I feel like that's kind of lame.
I think it's complete bullshit. I think it's trying to force people to play a game the way that you think they ought to play it, not the way that they want to play it to have fun in their way. It restricts the kinds of characters that you can make. I would love to see a system where I could walk in as like a first level, whatever, beginning character, and be some kind of like child magic savant where like I'm not very good at, magic generally, but for some backstory reason, I can cast a fireball like once a day and then I'm wiped out completely. I don't know Mage Hand, I don't know Magic Missile, I didn't do the prescribed path, but because of some shit that went down in the character's background, there's this one big thing that I can do. I think that your resources should be able to be spent fluidly, and if you want to make big investments in interesting things like that, That should be encouraged. Otherwise, you just get really samey ass shit. And with class systems that put you on rails, not only do they say that you have to do things in a certain order and you have to get certain abilities along the way, there are certain things that the classes can do that there is no other way of doing. It's not like you can take a feat and get, whatever the 5th level rogue ability is because you just wanted that one ability. You've got to go through all the fucking bullshit to get to that point. Like, what the fuck is this, college? That doesn't make any sense. So I hate it.
Maybe I'm compelled to ask the opposite question from the last. So we kind of enumerated a few. Is that even the right way of saying that word? I don't know. We've listed a few examples of the non-leveling variety, but outside of D&D, are there any other systems that level well? Are there any? I'm struggling to think of another system that straight up have these level bursts. What? Can you guys help me out here?
I'm thinking. Every system I can think of is usually a derivative of D&D in some way. I'm having a hard time thinking of any original systems that are designed to do something original that is class-based.
Whoa, hang on. We're conflating them again, levels and classes. If your question...
Oh, I'm sorry.
If your question is about levels, D&D and Pathfinder and that kind of stuff are the only ones that I can think of off the top of my head, though I'm sure there's some other clones that I'm forgetting at the moment. I mean, there's like everything that was in the D20 system obviously is all built off of that same model. But if you're talking about classes, though, it's hard to find games, even like brand new, especially modern games, that are not class-based. That's the current design trend from what I can tell, is that people are playing very explicit sandboxed classes. Like all the Apocalypse Engines games are like that. It's like you sit down and you're this kind of role. That's what you've been cast as for the game. And you're going to have your special stuff that nobody else can do. And that's what makes you a snowflake.
Yeah, I completely blanked on the whole Apocalypse Engine. Yeah, every single one of those, you choose a playbook that is specific to what you're going to be doing, and there is some ability to select some stuff from other playbooks, but generally not.
I found that most games just really prefer specialization, and that gives rise to the classes, levels, blah blah blah. Are there any games that reward just generalizing, where your characters, there's a lot of overlap, characters can do a lot of the same things, your character needs to do a lot of different things? Or are all games like meant to, like even like the Deadlands example I gave, you're very much, I'm going to be good with guns, I'm going to be good with magic, I'm going to be good with healing, spirit, blah blah blah. Are there any games that really reward generalization?
Star Trek does for sure. There's a couple different editions of it, and it's sort of more of a traveler character creation model. Like you go through the phases of your life, and you're pretty much always playing Starfleet officers. So it's like, years in the academy that you did X, Y, and Z. And at every one of those steps, like you start out with a really broad base of just general operational skills, and then you have specialties you go into, your tactical, your science, your operations, whatever. But it's, anybody could like pilot a shuttlecraft pretty much. Like you'd have to go out of your way to make a character that was just incapable of functioning in, Starfleet day-to-day operations, which is a whole lot of, narrative agency because the technology is so high in that system. Worf might be better on the phasers and photon torpedoes than Geordi, but Geordi can still do it if Worf is unconscious. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see the general trend of a lot of the games that I'm aware of anyway that are coming out, that there is the specialty where the game is this particular niche thing that the game is designed to do, and your characters are supposed to be these things inside of that. I think we're kind of past a lot of more generic systems becoming popular. The ones I can think of are the ones that are basically the old guard, and like GURPS, Hero. D&D has had a lot of attempts over the years, going back as far as Dragon Star from a sci-fi spin-off of original D&D to do a different genre, trying to make things cross genres and be available in multiple genres, and allowing characters to be more broad because the options, because you're pulling from so many different genres, you're inherently going to have a lot of options. And I see a lot of the focus on having a very particular game kind of limiting that ability to have a more general, basically a jack of all trades type of character be a viable option in the system.
Yeah, Savage Worlds has a jack of all trades ability. So there's one that it's possible to make somebody that's like decent at lots of different things. But
I remember some vaguely that in 3rd edition D&D, the Bard was kind of trying to do that. That like it was, the Bard just kind of was good, was kind of decent at a lot of things, but never could shine in any one particular area, and that's what made it really fall on its face. Am I remembering that correctly?
That's what the Bard has always been. It's always tried to be exactly 1/3 of each slice of the classic 3 basic classes of Dungeons and Dragons model, being the fighter, the thief, and the magic user. The Bard is supposed to be an equal slice of each of those, but not as great at any of those as, the pure corner of that triangle. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why it's always been so hard to do. Like, it's either super broken because it can do way too many of the things that otherwise it would take 3 classes to do, or it does just a really shitty job dipping its toe into each of the 3 classes. I remember in 2nd edition, I thought the Bard was like really good. And in subsequent editions, I don't know, not so great.
Now hold on, in 4th edition, the Bard was just as good as every other class, because every other class was just as good as every other.
Oh my god! I try to forget that.
I mean, am I wrong? But isn't 5th edition Bard considered like the best class, or one of the best classes?
I wouldn't consider it that. I'd put it maybe in like the top 5, maybe.
See, all the people who love bards are just happy that we're contenders now, and just elated that we're in the top half. And to us, that's like, oh, this is the best class now.
All those kind of in-betweener classes are like real tough to do. Like they've been kicking around the monk for decades, and I don't think it's ever been very great. The ranger has the same kind of problems. Like, is he a druid? Is he a fighter? Is he a rogue? What the fuck is he doing exactly? And I'd argue the druid is in that as well. It's like, he's not a priest, but he's kind of priestly. And I don't know, he's sort of a barbarian, whatever. I would say that because of severe lack of like serious playtesting, the 5th edition druid is probably one of the most broken things I've ever seen. But the paladin is hands down the best class in 5th edition, like, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with paladin being just straight up the best. You can't go wrong with making a paladin unless you roll the stats and just roll atrociously. You're going to have a very solid character if you play a paladin. Like, okay, comparing the campaign where I played the straight paladin, and Jordan, you played the character who dipped into several different classes. You were primarily a rogue, but you dipped into a couple of other classes and stuff. As far as just raw damage output, I felt like my paladin was, I didn't use anything that was outside of the player's handbook, and I was just able to just unleash holy hell on my enemies, whereas you had to really pick and choose your character at each step along the way in order to compete or be better at me at stuff.
Yeah, that was fighter, rogue, warlock, and that was the most specced out, min-maxed kind of character, like the most intricate I've ever gotten into a character build in my life. And yeah, I felt like I was doing good to keep up with you, and I had to do every fucking weird little like multi-attack combo things, using maneuvers to like disarm people, or try to get sneak attacks in, and like doing weird warlock tricks and like all this technical shit. Like I think about it in my mind as being like, some like Super Smash Brothers combo stuff that I was trying to pull off. Meanwhile, you're just like, oh, I'll hit him and dump like 1,000,000 D8s worth of smite damage along with that hit. I'm done. Jesus Christ.
Yep, that's exactly how it felt playing him.
Paladins are crazy in 5th edition.
I want to say one thing about class-based systems, especially in the way that that they've kind of changed it a little in 5e with the archetypes that they've now introduced. They've tried to sneak in additional classes without adding any actual new classes, except for the Artificer, I'll say. But all the archetypes are kind of like just a different version of the class, right? And I think that is a pretty good example of where game design, mechanical design, and game balance suffers due to market forces on the game. Because as long as they've got these exclusive paths that provide new character powers, with every new splat book they come out with, there's this new carrot being dangled in front of players' noses that GMs or DMs are largely going to hate, but because of peer pressure, they're going to give in to, the new weird thing and Tasha's whatever the fuck. And it's always got to be just a little bit better than the last thing that came out. But it would be a different kind of setup if it were just more feat options, for example. You notice we don't get a lot of new feat options. Like there's a few, but not nearly as much as all of the class archetype abilities that get released with each one of these new books. And it's that exclusivity that creates an artificial scarcity that's been designed into the game system specifically to sell books, I think. What do you guys think about that? Am I being paranoid, or am I just living under capitalism like everybody?
Oh no, man! I completely agree. I mean, if your game has 10 classes, man, that's 10 paper-bound books or small hardbound books you can make. I mean, 3rd edition was the worst for that shit. I mean, I remember knowing it was going to be a long night whenever I invited some players to play a game, and I was DMing, and then you'd have your average player who'd bring like the core books, maybe 1 or 2 books or whatever. And then, you'd always have that dude who like would just pull out the duffel bag and drop the like giant stack of books because they pulled, they have their class, their class book, and then they have the core book, and then they have this other splat book that has a random feat they won. And it's just, they've got a whole fucking library that you've never even bought. And you're just like, oh, jeez, it's going to be one of these guys. Oh, I hate that shit.
Yeah, I would say that so far, probably up until this year, possibly last year, 5th edition was really good about keeping reins on the amount of splat that came out, but I've been noticing that the number of books that they're releasing, that they have planned to release, is increasing. So I feel like we are heading into the end stages of this edition as they're starting to really give in to that bloat that has ended up crippling every previous edition of D&D.
Well, I think they're doing something very strategic with the archetypes, rather than like the thing in the 3rd edition years with the D20 tidal wave was that every new publisher, every new book would have a bunch of feats that you could take. That as long as you met the prerequisites for the feat, you could take them. There's more spells, more items, whatever. It was broadly accessible. But the way 5e's doing it, they're coming out with new archetypes, which start at level 3, which you can't really jump into if you've, that's one of the weird things about the 5e class system, is that once you're a character of level 3, you pick a path, and you can never ever get anything on any of the other branches of that class path. You could jump over a multi-class into a completely separate class, even though that is very, very different than what you're already doing, but you can't do what seems like should be a much shorter jump in the character's, general domain of knowledge and experience, and get any of those connected archetype abilities. And so I think they're trying to extend the life of the game by forcing people, if they want to use this new stuff, to start new games. And there's also kind of a disruptive element to it as well. Like, I could see a lot of DMs chafing at Eliot, in your Ravenloft game, let's say you were running that game for, let's say, at the 10 session mark with a bunch of characters that were from an earlier set, and then a new book comes out, some new player comes in, they want to show up with this completely new character type that was not even available at session 0 of that campaign. That's going to be kind of weird, right? So it sort of forces people, if they want to play this new stuff, to start a whole nother game, and that'll last a year or whatever.
That's where being a rather oblivious human really can be a help and a hindrance, because I'm like you were talking about the peer pressure. I'm just generally a yes DM, and it's like, oh, you want to do something with that? I don't know. You bought some random ass book and you want to use something from it? I don't give a shit. I don't want to go read it. And typically it'd be fine until it shows up in the game and you're like, oh God, what the fuck is this? Like, I should have read that book or whatever. But I mean, you just don't have time for that.
Speaking of not having time for stuff, I think we're running out of time for this episode. You guys ready to head on to Geek Things?
For sure.
Sure.
All right, I'll go ahead and start. I have one geek thing that is related to a previous geek thing. Back a couple, probably years ago now, I did a geek thing of the website This Person Does Not Exist. If you haven't checked that website out, I highly recommend it. But my particular geek thing is a particular video by a YouTuber that I frequently watch called That Dang Dad, and he did one kind of about the existential quandary of personhood and existence, and it's quite a trip to listen to. I would highly recommend that you listen to that. And on the other end of the YouTube spectrum, I have a channel that I want to recommend called Audit the Audit. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the constitutional audit YouTube, I guess, subculture, where people record themselves most often in interactions with police, but it could be with any other authorities, basically challenging their rights. This channel, Audit the Audit, I tend to be a person who really likes meta stuff, and this is an analysis and gives grades on people for their ability to both the people who are interacting with the police or authority figures and the authority themselves on how the interaction goes and how the situation could have gone better, because most often you're going to see a very uninformed public interacting with police who, given the sheer number of laws that they are tasked with enforcing, they're probably not going to know the minutia of all of the laws that they are tasked with upholding. So I recommend this if you are interested in individual rights in the U.S. and the application of those rights.
Fuck yeah.
Don't spoil my favorite YouTube videos when I'm in a bad mood. There's nothing more satisfying than queuing up YouTube and like watching some dude refuse to talk to a cop who's pulled them over. I love those videos, man. Like, I don't have to talk to you. Here's can I go? Can I go? Can I go? I love that shit,
Am I being detained?
Am I being detained? I love it.
Man, if you want to piss off a cop in 2021, repeatedly ask, am I being detained?
Oh my God. I love it. I do have sympathy, like you were kind of alluding to, Clayton. Like, the number of laws, it's ridiculous. So to expect a cop to know every aspect of the law, they're not lawyers, but at the same time, they get by with so much shit. It's very satisfying to watch a cop not get what they want. But anywho, so my geek thing, I want to shout out a YouTube channel called, just the name of the guy, Stefan Milo, STEFANMILO. Stefan is a history YouTuber, and he has extensively gone into great detail on various different prehistoric cultures, ancient hominids, our ancestors, and the history of prehistoric humans. And I've just found myself lately winding down and just really geeking out to his videos about just everything prehistoric. It's fascinating to get to know and to get more familiar with what we know archaeologically and genetically about our prehistoric ancestors, and the way in which they were very diverse, and how the different innovations really affected human flourishing. It's a great channel. He's very entertaining, and just want to shout him out. It's a great channel. I'll pass it on now.
For my geek thing, it's going to be a two-parter. I might have suggested this first one before, but it's worth it again. It's the Game Dev Field Guide podcast. It's this dude goes by Zachavelli. He talks about game design techniques, and specifically about video games, and it sounds like he does a lot with like sort of old school revival kind of games, but it doesn't get deeply into like the programming technicality kind of stuff. It's more like kind of the magic tricks that get done with limited resources with making games come to life. Things that you wouldn't think about, like the considerations between like when you're making a gun, do you make that bullet fire off as its own separate object that you're keeping track of? Or is it more like a laser beam that it just hits at a particular point instantly? And what you choose to do will affect the way that the game plays out. But I don't know, it's an interesting podcast about that border area between the deeply technical stuff on the software engineering end and the kind of softer game design elements, and how those two things like interact with each other. And the part two of this recommendation is a project that he has with his brother called Reroll Dice, and it's at rrdice.com. And basically they are finding or somehow getting waste plastic and turning it into dice sets. So you can get like a completely recycled set of dice that look pretty cool if it's, this weird kind of spacey looking, like, blob of multiple colors, and it looks pretty trippy. I kind of like them. But yeah, small operation, but a worthy cause, I think. I would hate to find a D20 in a dolphin's blowhole suffocating it one day on the beach. But yeah, check it out.
All right, guys. What do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Nah, I don't feel like
Recycle dice.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.